how do we move from fear to love, from shadow to light, from the feeling of a separate self to a feeling of integrated connection, from the feeling of an ego or a little self to a higher self.
When I'm coming from my ego, really just fear, I'm pushy, I'm emboldened, but I call it sexy. If you have desire, you have a me and a you. And that's problematic and amazing.
Welcome to Commune. We are on a mission to inspire, heal, and bring the world closer together. Danielle LaPorte, welcome back to the river of the Commune podcast.
Always a good day when we're hanging out. Always.
It is a good day. A day of attunement as we've rebranded Yom Kippur this year. No offense to my Jewish friends. Congratulations, first off. I know what the gestation period looks like when you're putting a project together. And every project that you embark on is done with such care and passion and attention to detail and beautiful design. And this one is no different. So well done. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I was thinking about trying to sculpt this conversation in the same spirit as the book, How to Be Loving, where there is as much salience in the sound of the words as their meaning. And let me just color that for a moment. I read most of it and listened to all of it, probably twice. And I recommend that everyone experience it the way that they choose to experience it. But I highly recommend listening to it. And I've told you this many times before. But your voice is this fertile, lush prairie, like both dense and airy. um, and there was many times experiencing the book where I actually stopped listening to the words as abstractions, as symbols for something else, and I found myself listening to the book as music, listening to it with my heart and not with my discursive brain, taking down notes, being like, oh, that's a good one. There's plenty of that's a good ones. Lots. I mean, and I have a lot of them written down. But in many ways, the words became non-representational. And it was just the feeling of the words. And in a way, I believe that that's very true to the spirit or the underlying substrate of the book, not really as a guidebook, but as a love letter, as an exhortation into the soul. So I wonder how you landed there on that approach. And I know that being a poet is quite natural. It's a natural proclivity for you. But how did you think about this more as a love letter, an exhortation to move from the ego to the higher self, and not just like a self-help guidebook? Can you unpack that for us a bit?
Thanks for all of that.
Mm.
I feel about how to be loving the way I feel about my everyday life, which is like they're urgent. Like, let's get together. People are suffering. I'm in a bit of pain. Let's get out of this pain. We have other choices. And I also feel 100% chill. It's okay. There's meaning. Things are unfolding. There's a divine hand. But there is a middle part of the sandwich, which is We can go kicking and screaming, or we can dance a little more. So it's like, it's urgent and it's inevitable. We have a choice and it's choiceless. It's really, and I use the word creative tension so intentionally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is the great Tao. Without tension, there would be no relaxation. We only know one in relation, to the other. And while there's an urgency, like you say, there is also a letting go. Um, and and this is, I think, the feeling that the book conveys so beautifully. Um, in many ways, all of us that are committed to the examined life and to having conversations like this and to embarking on projects, um, in some ways, we're all poking at the same thing. Um, how do we move from fear to love, from shadow to light, from the feeling of a separate self to a feeling of integrated connection, from the feeling of an ego or a little self to a higher self? And I think one way to help people or um, to verbalize this is to unpack this idea of the ego. How do we recognize it within ourselves? So maybe you could spend some time sharing, how do we identify the ego and how have you come to understand it?
Well, I love my ego way more than I used to. And that has helped in how I identify the ego and I see when I'm in it and when I'm not in it. Because my old experience used to be like the ego is something I need to repress. And I've got this dark side, and I need to get on top of the ego, control my ego, not be too big for my britches. I need to be more pure of heart. All this purification stuff. You can hear the Catholicism in it, right? And then, with some mystical research and my own common sense, I figured out like, wait a second. I made the ego. It's my baby.
Mm,
Why would I want to leave it on the deck? Why would I want to neglect it? I made it. And then also there's some surrender, which is I'm here in this dimension, there's duality. I should learn to get along with my ego. I think the ego, how I define it now, is it's an exaggerated sense of separateness. So I know when I'm coming from my ego, really just fear, I'm pushy, I'm emboldened, but I call it sexy. Um, I'm righteous, but I say this on behalf of love. Here's all the things you did wrong, but this is so we can move forward together. There's a push. So it really feels like me versus other plus.
mm,
When I'm in my heart, I am so interested in you feeling good. I'm interested in your nervous system, actually. And I don't neglect myself, but I want, sometimes when I look at my man, I think, oh my gosh, I want you to heal as much as I want me to heal. There's no ego in that. There's just, you matter as much as me. In fact, sometimes maybe you even matter more than me. And I feel really swept away in the best way. I feel really kind of selfless. And I'm going to get even more mystical, which is, so many great teachers say, like, the mind itself is ego. That's it. It is
mm.
designed to desire. And if you have desire, you have aversion. If you have desire, you have a me and a you. And that's problematic and amazing.
Yeah, I've often thought that we're in some manner pre-programmed to develop an ego just by our mere sensory instruments that we're born with. We're expelled from the womb and our eyes begin to focus and we develop auditory capabilities, and we are taught to label things then largely in the foreground of our experience. And it starts in a very prosaic, innocuous way, like, oh, there's our cat, and there's the fridge, and there's a car. And then, over time it becomes, well, there's another person, and then there's another person with a different sexual orientation or a different political affiliation or a role in society that might be greater or might be more appreciated than mine. And in that labeling, inherent to it, is a self-labeling. And then we come up with this symbol that we have for ourselves that we populate with all these roles called the ego. But I think the twist that you put on it is fascinating, because there is a sort of trope of like eschewing the ego and we'll be good, transcending the ego and we'll be good. But I think what you're saying is that if we can witness the ego part of ourselves, the unhealed part of ourselves, as you call it, we know that that is exactly the thing that is looking for the love. And you do such a beautiful job cultivating that soil and marrying it with this idea of acceptance, of accepting ourselves and who we are. I want to, when I was reading the book, I came across this poem. I'm sure you know it. I want to read it just because I had it. I used to have this memorized, but it's a Rabindranath Tagore poem. I'm sure you know it. I came out alone on my way to my tryst. But who is that follows me in the silent dark? I move aside to avoid his presence, but I escape him not. He makes the dust rise from the earth with his swagger. He adds his loud voice to every word that I utter. He is my own little self, my lord, and he knows no shame. But I am ashamed to come to thy door in his company. And of course, Tagore is talking about the ego there. Do you feel that we should be ashamed of our ego?
No, but we are.
Hmm.
The the most growth, the biggest leaps I've taken have been when I've loved the part of myself that I've hated. Like, and not just, and it's not just conceptual of just like, oh, I can be arrogant and I can be manipulative. It's like I was arrogant and I
Hmm.
was manipulative. And, in this line of work, I was arrogant in front of a lot of people and I got paid for it.
There's
And
reinforcement there.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so like it's for me, it's actually some speaking gigs that I've had where just like, can't believe I said it, can't believe how I said it, can't believe when I said it. And they're just like, oh, wince. And it's taken some years, like I'd say 4 years from like one gig where I just like, I had to keep bringing that in. And it's so practical. Like I see the incident in my heart and I talk to it and I change my tone. Like the tone originally is like, can't believe you did that, cannot do that again, gotta get that in check, look at all that. And then all the psych 101 that I know how to apply, that's from my shadow self, that's the wounded self. But guess what, you're still not there yet. You can analyze it to the max, you still haven't transformed it, you're just kind of pawing at it until I go, oh, I love you anyway. I love you anyway. I love that arrogant, fragmented part of myself. I love the incident anyway. And I got to keep working with it, working with it, working with it. And then how my mind reacts to physical pain has been a huge teacher with this kind of act of love. So, like, I had a chronic situation that was really painful for a while.
Mm.
Now, I believe that all pain, emotional and physical, it's a messenger. That's all. It's not even, in some ways, oh, this is getting really esoteric. It's not even real, but it's coming to say something to me. So I have the physical pain. I don't even know, what are you trying to say to me? But I don't want you in my life. Push away, not embrace. Okay, Danielle, use your medicine. Engage in friendship with everything. My arrogant move, my physical pain. Okay, this is it. This is the work. I'm rolling up my sleeves. And I say to my physical pain, I give it the basics. You're here to tell me something. Oh, yeah, okay. Today I can hear the message. It's slow down, it's be gentle, it's something. I can't hear the whole thing. I have to leave lots of room for mystery. And I say to my pain starts to calm down, or my frantic mind calms down. And I say, even if you come back tomorrow, I'll love you. It was the most, it's the most unconditional thing. It's the sweetest move I could make. Like, my dear pain, I am vast. You can come back tomorrow and I'll be here.
Mm.
I think that's the most powerful thing I've done in the last 2 years. In my
Mm.
bathroom, crying. Just like, I got you. I'm vast. I'm that. I am that loving. I can have a conversation with you tomorrow.
I think a lot of transformation happens alone in the bathroom crying. um, you talk about a story in the book where you're walking, I think, in a park with a friend who has a penchant for passive aggressiveness, and and you're in a state that's where your cell receptors are open to this passive aggressiveness. And she says some offhanded comment, and and you're ready there, you're poised, and then you find, I think what you said, that you paused instead of pouncing, and that you were able to tap into your higher self to find a connection with that person and ask yourself, why is she so hurting? What is the pain in her life? And I thought it was a beautiful, I mean, just very simple um, example, but that's the way quotidian life is. It's full of simple little things. And can we punctuate our quotidian life with that ability to move from the me to the we, right? And ask ourselves, like, what's going on with this person, that she has this proclivity to make these passive aggressive comments towards me. I thought it was a brilliant little moment in the book.
Mm. The move was first about myself before I could make it about her. So before I got all loving and enlightened, say, like, she's got some unhealed stuff that keeps coming back, and she's been in it for a long time. And this is, why she can talk to me the way she does. And this was so simple. And this ties up. This brings us into, like, Buddhism and poetry. We're in the park. We're doing our dance of passive aggressive. And the pause came from, I looked at the sky and I remembered the Buddhist metaphor that we are that vast. I am the sky. Now, this is why poetry works sometimes, because it, like, circumnavigates all of, like, yeah, but she said and I said and my therapist said, right? They're just like, okay, Danielle, you're the sky. You are this vast. Your love is this big. I relax. I'm not bracing for impact. And then once I had correct identification, I am love. I'm love. I got this. She can do this. It's okay. Then I got to be like, oh, right, her pain. And I just put up with it that day. And it felt great. Like it didn't even feel like a putting up with, it felt like a holding. I'm going to hold her mood because I'm the sky. And that's just one small example of that normally would have turned into someone was going to take the bus home and it was going to take weeks to repair, or I got expanded, they got listened to so much better. It was a bridge.
Yeah. And what is the human condition but billions of tiny little actions and decisions?
Yeah. Yeah. This is counter to boundary culture, right? Like, I'm all for boundaries. We have to have boundaries. My friend Terry Cole has written a beautiful book on boundaries, helping people realize they need them and scripting them. And I think we have to do away with a lot of them at a certain point where they become barriers. So I could have gotten into that she crossed my boundaries conversation inside and put up a wall, and instead we can just decide I can take this.
One place that the book really hit home with me personally um, was around striving. And again, this harkens back to the Bodhi tree. But one of the causes of inherent suffering is our proclivity to cling, to crave, to strive, to force, to interfere. Um, but striving is an interesting one because I really feel the need and the desire to grow. And I wake up and I'm like, "Rrr, okay, what am I going to read today? How am I going to grow my basket of knowledge? And you put it in the way that you frame it in the book, um, and the thoughts that it inspired in me is that like every natural system, and I'm very into the Tao and the course of nature, so I look at natural systems all the time. Cycles, between growth and repair. So nature promises a spring with every winter, and we have wakefulness, and we have sleep, and we have cell growth, and mammalian targeted rapamycin pathways, and then all this kind of stuff with hypertrophy and all this stuff. But then we also have cell autophagy. We have cell repair, but we have so sanctified growth, and particularly, and this is the part where I was like, drop the mic for you, was you write that we have this globalized economic system that relies incessantly on growth without rest and repair. And we hold ourselves as humans to the same expectations of that constant growth cycle. And we see what that growth imperative um, yields in the world, yet we put ourselves into that exact same imperative. And boy, it really like hit me where I just said, man, Jeff, you've got to like let go of waking up with this feeling that I have to grow at all times because that is a reflection of the ego.
Yes. I couldn't relate more. I have a question for you. If
Mm.
you knew that you were going to die in a couple days, would you be concerned about growing? It just occurred to me.
No,
right?
not at all. I would be concerned with being as utterly present as I possibly could be to the precious time I would have here and with my loved ones and with the experience of this wondrous existence.
Because I'm wondering, just, in the conversation of like, if the obsession of growth has to do with our fear of death, like, it's like, I want to stay young, I want to stay strong, I want to be knowledgeable and more robust and more in fun, all those things, more capable, more capable. And, last summer, I found this incredible esoterica book. It was one of those moments in life. Like, I was in the middle of a small town. I wasn't meant to go into this bookshop. It fell off, it was 100. The book was 100. I walk into the bookstore and the dude at the front counter says, everything in the store is $10 today. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I walk to the very back. I pull out this book. It says rare edition, $100. And I'm like, is this book $10 today? Anyway, deep esoteric kind of, brotherhood stuff. And I needed to know everything about it. I needed to know how, flame works in visualization and the pointed stars and all of that. And I realized this book was making me so anxious. Now, I think there's an actual energetic thing happening. I'm kind of immersing myself in this teacher's frequency. And it wasn't my heart that struggled with putting that book aside. It was my ego that struggled with it. Of just like,
Mm.
I am a slacker and there is knowledge that I need, and this could help me manifest. It could help me heal things. And around the same time of deciding I needed to just go on a diet of all of it, I think I just really have reckoned with like, I am mortal. I'm going to die. I could die any minute. I've had some close friends who I consider to be like really powerful healers, like truly sagacious. And they got knocked on their asses in the last few years. And I just like, you just don't know when the hand is coming. And I'm just like, I'm good. And I have infinity to get it right. And infinity is terrifying. Terrifying.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't know where that was going, but I've sworn off a lot of self-help and esoteric stuff.
I mean, certainly, just to ground it in kind of my own personal experience, um, there's a feeling that I have to make up for lost time. And if I try to do a proper sort of root cause analysis of that, well, why is that? Well, because I don't know enough and I didn't devote enough of my early life to edifying myself or, being fluent around quantum entanglement and neuroplasticity and the epigenome and, whatever, all the things that I've missed. So now I've got to make up for lost time. But why? Oh, to
Because
appear
yes,
fluent?
I think we want to punish ourselves for being unconscious.
Mm,
It's such a trip. It's just so much more division. It's so unforgiving. It is so counter heart,
mm,
actually.
yeah. It's also, you know, reading the book also, um, I ask myself, I try to witness where my ego is showing up, even in the most kind of seemingly selfless activities. And, when I'm engaged in what I might deem acts of seva or selfless service. And I'm like, is it really that selfless, actually? Um, I think you have a phrase in the book that, or are we doing it to earn us divine favor with God? Um, and I think these are when you talk about this transformation or this transition from the unconscious into the conscious, it often it points us towards self-inquiry, doing an inventory of asking ourselves why. What is my true underlying motivation here? Is it a heart-centered um, motivation, or is there something else at play? Am I looking for approval, or am I looking to impress, or am I looking for some form of, you know, external approbation to address my own perceived deficiencies?
I think another way of asking that is this coming from a place where I feel connected to this person
Hmm.
or this situation, or am I trying to rise above it, be outside of it? It's like, um, I walk down my street. I live in this sweet little cul-de-sac, and only 2 blocks away, I can find 10 homeless people or 10 people living homelessly asking for money. And now my practice is with everybody. I just walk down and go, "Wow, I'm you, you're me. I'm you, you're me.
Hmm.
Come from the same source." And it's had this really softening effect where I feel way less judgment. Like, what are you going to do with the money that you're given? Are you going to go get a hit of something? All that stuff. Got over that a while ago. But I also feel more relaxation with people's choices. Like, who, I don't know the growth that someone is getting from begging for money on the corner. That could be their bodhisattva move. They could be enlightened, and this is their suffering. We all going to suffer in different ways because we're in this boot camp called Earth. But like maybe that's his thing, and I actually can I move into like, wow, entertaining some respect. It's amazing.
Yeah, this feeling that we have when the sense of self begins to dissipate, and we feel connected and or interconnected, and that's really what it is. It is a feeling, and this is why I think your job is so difficult because the poet is trying to solve an insoluble problem insofar that she is trying to say what cannot be said, because the mystical can only be felt. This transition of the feeling of what it is like to be a separate self to what it is like to be one with the world, where there is only the world, um, that is and there's a consilience around that feeling across every spiritual tradition and religion, and of course the great poets try to poke at it, and on a very good day, and you've had very many good days, you give us a glimpse into that transcendence. But what separates a belief system from a mystical experience is sensation. And yeah,
Well, I think when you tap into that, you're actually not feeling. You're in it. You're experiencing. I'm experiencing interconnectivity. I'm experiencing the shimmer. And then we come out of it and we go, "Oh, that's what that feels like."
absolutely. Um, that was well qualified. Um, because Rumi has this wonderful poem, "The Guest House," where he's talking about emotions as phenomena, sort of arising and subsiding in consciousness. They're uh, guests to a dinner party, and they show up and they steal a bread roll or whatever they do, and scurry out the back door or whatever. They come and go, but you are the house. You know, you are the sky. Emotions are clouds. You are the road. Emotions and feelings are um, bicyclists or pedestrians, whatever. Um, but I think what you're talking about here is that connectedness and a this innatness is really it's almost visiting a state of being, kind of the way you visit the United States or Colorado, except you don't have to go on an airplane to go there. It's just it's not something that visits you. It is that it is a state of being in which you can inhabit that state of being on on a temporary basis, and we're all trying to kind of maximize the length of this particular vacation. Um, but then you get spit out back into, ego world of the 10,000 things, and then and but and this is potentially a transition into a large section of the book where that you devote to virtue. But that state of being has a signature or certain characteristics that you can recognize when you're there. You're like, um, that was that. And
I
so,
get some love today. Yeah.
yeah, yes, yeah. Um, so maybe we could talk a little bit about virtue. Um, and because you spend some time in the book dissecting uh, 7 virtues: um, love, compassion, wisdom, forgiveness, loving kindness, resilience, radiance. And uh, but first, and I'd love to unpack how you understand each one of those things, and we don't have to hover on each one for forever. But maybe as a starting place, you could elaborate on how you actually understand virtue, because I think you have an interesting spin on the concept of virtue itself.
For me, it's not a psychological conversation. So this is not about morality. It's not about ethics, because those are even can be divisive. Those are constructs of the mind. Virtue is the higher consciousness. It's it. I like to think of it as divine love. We have these creative tensions, this magnetism, this pulse of life. It is divine love itself. And then I see all the virtues as the daughters of divine love. So, visually it's like divine love is the light. It's this sun and all those rays coming out of that, unique unto themselves, individual virtues. And so you can be compassionate, it's an act of love. You can be forgiving, it's an act of love. Everything high vibe gets back to the vibe.
I think this differentiation is important because we're living in an era where there's a lot of signaling around virtue.
Yes.
Um,
Which I'm okay with, by the way. We need
I
to be
mean,
okay with what we judge as virtue signaling.
right.
Can I unpack that?
Please.
Okay. Your virtuousness is between you and your soul. It is not for anybody else to say where it's coming from. It is who can judge how you let the light of consciousness work through you? You can't. And the fact that anybody would stand up and say, that is not loving enough. There is a motive underneath that. That needs to be questioned in and of itself. Are you not loving enough that you can sit back, not judge, or just let it unfold as it will? I
Hmm.
think yes, there's some of us who have the lucidity, the wisdom to say, okay, that's performative. That donation is just for a tax write off. They're just halo polishing. Sure, it's happening all the time. Let them do it. Let them do it. Because sometimes when we fake being loving, we start to realize what love really is. And I think with virtue, with consciousness, we're all playing with different degrees of consciousness. So, like, just just play, just pretend to be compassionate. See what happens. See how it feels. And you go, oh, wow, that kind of felt good. And I got a thank you note and I slept better that night. Okay, play with a little more. Oh, and then you will get, wow, I was faux compassionate. Now I'm really compassionate. And then I think there are some of us who we just hit our strides with a particular virtue. And when you
Mm.
really are being the virtue, you don't even know. Someone can say to you, wow, you're so compassionate. And and that person just kind of shrug and say, well, what do you mean? They're embodied. Yeah, so enough with the virtue signaling, canceling is what I'm really trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, the Tao has a fantastic um, exposition on virtue, um, and really has a very an understanding of virtue much more similar to yours, I believe. It's not tied to um, relative morality or ethics. Really, they are states to be embodied. And most often, being virtuous is actually moving with nature's course. And there is a refined and intuitive skill to it. It's not just a complete surrender, though sometimes you can move down the river with greater ease if you just let yourself go limp. But it is actually an application of the rudder such that, you're leveraging nature's way down the course of life. And the Tao says great virtue, which is de, the te in the Tao Te Ching is actually translated as virtue. But great virtue does not virtue signal, so it is true virtue. Cheap virtue merely virtue signals, so it's not virtue after all. Great virtue is spontaneous, hence it is non-transactional. Cheap virtue is contrived and is transactional. This has been a powerful lens for me during this time because you and I and everyone. I mean, our lives are very public, um, and the Serengeti of social media is is cruel.
Yeah, yeah.
is cruel.
Influencers are
And,
the new gladiators. Yeah.
yeah, right. Um, and and so when I find myself, we have no choice but to be in nature's course. It's just happening. So I mean, and you say this. I of course, when you write a book, it's yours. But then you like release it out into the world. People like me read it, and it's not yours anymore. Now it's mine because I'm bringing my own, thoughts to it. So I'm like overlaying. I'm sitting here reading your book and listening to it, and then I've got my tattered copy of the Tao Te Ching right here. And I'm like, oh shit, she's actually talking about the Tao right here. And and so I mean, I think you point to this in the book that we have no choice. I mean, we are in the current um, of life, and uh, and are we going to swim upstream and and that's surely the easiest way to exhaust ourselves and to drown, or are we going to become um, skillful in navigating nature's course and move with it? And uh, so, and there's great gratification in that. I mean, maybe we could talk specifically about compassion, for example. Like what your understanding and experience of compassion is, because it's when you're there, it is one of the most gratifying places to be.
I think compassion has a lot to do with mercy. And
Mm,
how I define mercy is, imagine that you and Buddy commit the same crime and you get 20 years. and you hope he doesn't get arrested at all. That's mercy. So it's like same degree of density, and you pray that they don't have to pay the same price. You're just really wishing that everybody catches a break. That's mercy. There's no
Mm.
self in there.
Yeah, there's a Sanskrit word mudita, which is often translated as empathetic joy, but really the way I've understood it is the experience of joy simply for someone else's joy. And it's a very not that a spiritual journey deserves to be measured or gauged, but sometimes I think about this and apply it to myself, where I see someone achieve something great, and what emotion comes up? Am I just absolutely overjoyed for that person? Or is there a little voice saying, like, that's a projection of your unfulfilled potential, like, onto that person, and I feel envious or jealous, etc. Um, but I think when you well up with joy, or this also could be true um, for tears or pain, to identify someone else's suffering as your own. Um, when you have that experience where you are crying for someone else's suffering, or you're high fiving and jumping up and down with joy for someone else's achievement, that is a reflection of connection, of compassion for me.
I feel most um, expanded and just cool when I'm happy for somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like I'm so happy for you.
Yeah. With no strings attached.
No strings attached. No judgment in there either. Like, my shadowiness in that would be like, I'm happy for you, and I hope you can keep it up because you could lose it, or just all those judgments. No, I'm just happy for you, and I have faith that your success is going to expand you. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. You talk about the experience of uh, interacting with someone who's homeless, for example. And it brings up for me this word that I recently stumbled across called sonder. Very simple word, Sonder. Um, it's the profound feeling of realizing that everyone, including strangers passing in the street, has a life as complex as one's own. I was like, whoa, that's a good word. Um, let's talk a little bit about wisdom. I think you do a wonderful job dissecting the difference between knowledge and wisdom. So have at it.
This helped me let go of my own morning time striving anxiety,
Mm, mm,
is to realize that wisdom has nothing to do with knowledge, acumen, resume, research, or data. And that how you know a wise person or a wise decision from an unwise person or decision is wisdom will always include everybody. So wisdom is always coming to the table to say, okay, how can this benefit everybody or harm somebody? And that's how you go from there. It's really, I think, like, I would define divine love as the ultimate inclusiveness. And wisdom is like, you know, the woman who's holding the statues of justice,
mm.
the scales of justice.
Yeah.
Wisdom upholds divine love. Like, okay, everybody is in, and I'm here to make sure we all know that. Let us proceed. And it can happen. We know when we're in the presence of a wise person. It's Someone can be simple. They could be working in a factory. They could be digging ditches. They could be a guru. It also helps you when you carry on with this concept of wisdom, the virtue, really helps you see when there are people we have put on pedestals, for me, more spiritual folk, that I think, oh, that is not an inclusive teaching. Like, oh, he was being a little divisive there. Oh, that's not wise. Got it. Check.
It's completely not associated with how many letters might appear at the end of your name.
Yes.
um,
Or how many followers you have in your darshan, your temple, or your Instagram.
I think that there's a lot of humility that's associated with wisdom. Um,
Wisdom leads from behind. That's why it's just
mm,
like myself is equal to yourself. This is not about my small self trying to get inflated. This really is like united we stand, divided we all fall. Like I think that's one thing we lose in that concept. Like united we stand. Yes, we got that. Divided we fall. No, everybody loses. And when you realize that, when you're wise enough to see like we only are going to get where we want to go together, then it's not don't have this ideology like it's okay if they suffer a little bit and we've helped this community over. No, we all go. It's what we're seeing online right now with what's happening in Iran. Like none of us are free until all of us are free. No, no.
yeah. I mean, it's so unbelievably inspiring what's happening in Iran.
Fantastic.
I
And
mean,
look at the suffering involved in that uprising. I mean, this is a beautiful occasion, and this is easy to say from my apartment in Vancouver, but this is a beautiful occasion to see where um, the meaningfulness in the agony.
yeah, it's often posited that failure begets experience and experience begets wisdom, but only if you're humble enough to recognize the mistake. Because what's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, the person with too much pride or hubris would double down and say, oh well, I'm just going to keep doing it over and over again. But the wise person actually understands and acknowledges his or her own deficiency or his or her own mistake and is humble enough to learn from it.
Yes, wisdom is always integrating. Wisdom is not predicated on life experience. We all know people who have traveled the world, built businesses, all the things, and are still ogres, right? So it comes through love. So that learning from experience is an act of love. You bring the experience in, you apply some gentleness, it becomes a part of you. You get
Mm,
wiser.
yeah.
Mhm.
Um, let's talk a little bit about forgiveness.
Oh, okay. I think it's the reason we incarnate. I think we are
Mm,
here. I think we exist on this planet in this dimension to forgive.
mm,
And, my favorite kind of phrase over the last year is hey, everybody, the heart is for giving. And then you give it a nice poetic pause. And you see the eyes light up and they go, oh, the heart's forgiving. The heart is forgiving. And when we are not giving of love, when we are not forgiving, we are not being our true nature. We're in denial of our power. And that being the case, like, I think forgiveness is actually our default and we want to forgive. And I've had this experience myself where, I was in a car accident and it was the other guy's fault. My car was total and I walked away. But there's all these things to bring in like insurance and the person whose fault it is, their insurance goes through the roof and it's not
mhm,
great. And I wanted to just let it go. I was okay. I was going to get a new car. Wasn't going to cost me anything. It's all okay. And I just felt so soft and beautiful about that decision. And then I let myself get talked out of it. And I just felt dank and ugly.
Mm.
And I think we talk ourselves out of things in terms of forgiving all the time because of the contract. Or well, this is one of my least favorite words now is like accountability. We're obsessed with accountability. The ego loves accountability structures for ourselves and others. Yeah. Because you're not good enough. You're not keeping up. You're right. You're wrong. You said you would do this and you didn't. And no,
Mm.
forgiving is so much more fun.
Kind of transcendent examples of forgiving. I think that really it tests us in a way. I mean, these families from the Nichols Mine incident, or from the Dylan Roof killings in the church in South Carolina, where these families all got up and forgave a mass murderer, and more recently in Gabor Mate's book, he talks about this. Well, Edith Egger, she's a psychologist whose grandparents were killed in the Holocaust, and eventually she returns and goes to Hitler's hometown and forgives him. And I think this really tests our mettle here around forgiveness. Now, yes, clearly forgiveness is a gift that you give yourself as much as it is a gift that you give others. It sort of purges toxicity and anger. It's like, who's holding the ember of resentment? Well, you are. You're getting burned. So if you can forgive, you just throw that away. But there's a tension between forgiving and that notion of accountability or justice. So is everyone in your mind deserved of forgiveness?
Yes. Yes. Everyone is deserved. We all come from the same source. No one is outside of the fabric of love. And we live in duality. There is, we need to create conditions of healing. So if somebody is toxic and deranged, they are forgiven, they are loved, and they got to go live over here so that they
Mm,
are no longer harmful to society. Like that's basically, but everybody gets cared for. That person gets cared for in the forgiveness, and the community gets protected. I think there's a conversation around anger and rage, right? So there's a place for holy anger, and holy anger is like you are enraged on behalf of what's best for the collective. That, for me, all children everywhere should be protected constantly, no matter what. And that should be number one on every political, educational, medical agenda without question.
mm,
And I have a holy anger that that is so not the case. But that rage is on behalf of uplifting, protecting, compassion for humanity. Anger is you did this, you got to pay.
yeah, it's a crime and punishment mentality. It's a punitive mentality. And this speaks to kind of Abrahamic justice versus a restorative justice. Like a restorative justice is much more focused on the harm that was done, on who was harmed, and how do we help make that person whole? How do we help the healing process? But we're very much geared around kind of the crime and punishment of the person that has kind of deviated from the orthodoxy. And as you say, absolutely correctly, we have to separate people that are antisocial and who are a threat. Um, and at the same time, I think our culture would be better served if we were more focused on the person that was actually harmed, and then the redemption and rehabilitation
Yes,
of the
rehabilitation.
people that had done the harm.
Yes. And this
Uh,
is the darkness of so much, well, some of, social justice movements and activism is it's unreined rage looking for payback. And
mm,
that does not create progress, as opposed to another option, which is we have a vision and we are going to get everybody in line with this vision, no matter what. We will not stop. But
mm,
everybody's included in this vision, and it's a forward motion versus let's just stand in the middle of this problem and duke it out.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that brings us, I think, to a perfect bridge into loving kindness.
Oh,
What is loving
they're
kindness?
all my fave. Ah. Well, loving kindness, as defined by Buddhism, is a warm friendliness towards all things. And I think this is the most powerful virtue for self acceptance and healing,
Mm,
is that if you can just change the tone with which you talk to yourself and how you engage with your fear. Like, I write about and how to be loving. Like, please, could we stop overcoming our fear? Or trying to overcome our fear. Let's have a loving kindness relationship with our fear. It's just asking for
mm.
our attention. Just wants to be integrated. Yeah. Warm, unconditional friendliness.
One way that you describe it in the book is an active interest in others. That's good. I mean, I think we know it as metta um, in Sanskrit, this sort of unconditional bringing forth of goodwill and benevolence. But this, I think, the way that you point to this idea of taking an active interest in others, that is very sweet, and you can see it in yourself. I mean, you can see when you're doing it.
Yes. You can see at a party. Now there's a shadow side to this. There's fake loving kindness. Like, I'm interested. I want to know your story. There's all sorts of personality defenses in there, but don't you just love people who are interested in you? Doesn't it just soften you? This curiosity, like, we're all on the same page. What's your story? Oh, yeah, you melt.
Hmm. It's also a fantastic tool, not to feed the ego, but it's a fantastic tool for learning. Um, we're both very friendly with Zach Bush. I saw him yesterday, actually, and he's unique in this way. And I've told him this many times, where he will be in a setting with lots of very interesting people, and he's a very interesting person. Um, but one of the ways that he grows is through active listening. It's very apparent when he does it. He will be absolutely, completely present for someone else. And I think this is why he's able to hold a lot of disparate ideas and thoughts, is because he's constantly learning through his active interest. It's
Which
cool.
I would say is constantly putting the small self on pause. So
Mm,
you're just saying to your ego for a minute, I'll get back to you in a minute. I'm going to step outside of my paradigm or my viewpoint and be big enough to entertain somebody else's. Yeah.
mm. Okay, resilience.
Not
Uh,
what we think it is. It's not about being
Wait.
tough. It's not about being leathery. It's even really barely about being stronger. It's about flexibility. And you can only be flexible from the heart. I mean, it's really the dynamic that we both just kind of mashed together with describing an engaged listener is like,
Mm,
I'm going to be present with what is. I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to push it away. I'm going, and actually, my best story around resiliency has to do with this great learning with a shaman. We, did this beautiful ceremony. I was in this very broken time of my life. I needed some protection. And he just said to me, we bend so that we don't break. And I really got it. It was like,
Mm.
I'm going to be more flexible. This is resilience. It's not fighting. It's not stating my case. It's not going to court. It's not, all the survival mentality stuff. It's like, oh, I'm going to give a little. I'm going to listen a little more. I'm going to be open to this. And then you are officially tough.
Mm. I think the bending idea is pregnant. Yeah, I think you mentioned this in the book, but there are trees like pine trees or spruce trees that under the weight of snow they bend and their branches sort of fold and they just shrug the snow off like it never happened, you know. But there's other trees like oaks that try to stand, rigid and inflexible, and when they bear too much weight they snap. And and we see this, all around us,
I
you
think
know
it
it,
plays out in going to court. You remember one of my first early lessons as an entrepreneur is, me going to my lawyer and saying, but it's the principle of the matter. And he said, Danielle, I have watched people bankrupt themselves and drain their kids' college funds because of the principle of the matter. Just,
right.
the flex is let it go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, settle up. Maybe you're right. You probably are. But, you know, be like water.
My
This
friend.
is again the Tao.
Yes. Yes.
Never resist. Take any form. Go where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And there is nothing more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I have an annoying pastime um, that I'll share with you. Uh, I'm a relatively, I wouldn't call myself a slow driver, but I'm not like an aggressive macho driver. I'm listening to a podcast. I'm in the flow. I'm kind of just going down the
You're like a
road.
hippie
Maybe,
bro driver.
yeah, I'm like 5 miles over the speed limit. To me, that's,
Oh my
like,
God.
okay.
How's
And
Skylar deal with that?
not well. Um, and sometimes the car behind me will get frustrated with my somewhat lackadaisical attitude towards driving, and they'll like lay into their horn uh, as if they're giving me an insult. Essentially, like it's like "f you," and then we'll pull up to a red light, and that car will like come to my side, ready to like flip me off or something like that. And I will pretend that their honking was um, was an acknowledgement that they know me somehow. And I then turn to them and I wave and put on a huge smile like the one you have now, and wave as if they were like a cousin that I hadn't seen in a couple of years. And I will say they're just dumbfounded. They don't know what to do. And in I guess a way, there's the best way to disarm an insult is to be unaffected by it. So
More
that's
than
my.
unaffected. That's loving kindness meets vaudeville. Yeah, good.
Yeah, there is definitely a vaudeville element to it. I feel like I'm a mime, like, hey. Um, okay. Um, Radiance. This was actually, it's not a virtue or a quality that I was as familiar with unpacking. So I had a really interesting experience learning about it. Can you share what you have come to understand as radiance?
Let's do what radiance is not. Radiance is not showing up to shine and getting your glow on, no matter what. Yes, you want to be the love in the room. you want to spin it positive if you can. But I think in the self help space, uh, the glow can be a lot of ego. What radiance, I believe, as a virtue is it's the fire. It's what's left after the fire.
Mm.
So all the masks get burned, all the ego rolls get toasted. And what are you left with? You. Just more authentic you, more gentle you, wiser you, more compassionate you, more I know what matters really now. You. And those people are radiant. You see, you know, they've gone through the dark night. They're on the other side. They do have that shine. And you can't put it on. It is, I don't want to say earned, but there's some initiation involved for real radiance.
Does the lotus have to come out of the mud puddle?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, they need each other.
So,
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I guess my question there is, does radiance have to be so hard wrought? D- uh, Do we need, as a, for our own growth, spiritual growth, for this transformation from little self to higher self, does that require suffering?
Seems so, but, and I talk about this with radiance and how to be loving. Beautiful guru woman, Ananda Mayima, says, suffering is the end of suffering. That took me a minute. When you really integrate it, like we're talking about wisdom, when you turn the pain into power, your whole relationship to suffering shifts. It's like, oh, I got something out of it. I was in the mud and I became the lotus. There's something amazing happening here. So you start to appreciate the alchemy that happens from the challenge.
Mm.
And I think the sweetness of that appreciation has you, you're less resentful. It dissolves your resentments towards suffering. And then you know what? It's happening. It's going to happen. It seems to be, we wouldn't call it universal necessary, seems to be very earthly to suffer. So, Alan Watts, there will always be suffering. Trick is to not suffer over the suffering.
Mhm.
And I think some of us can reach a level of enlightenment, and it may just, you know, there's little punctuated moments where a challenge can come and we can actually kind of get off on it, like, ooh, this is a stinger, but there's something in here. And I think what happens if we can do that is possibly, not always, we can move through it more quickly. When we embrace the suffering, we actually suffer less. And it's empowering. It's really, you know, I'm not, Yogananda teaches us, don't go looking. Basically, he said, I put it in Danielle terms, like, don't go looking for suffering. But when it comes, there's something to be celebrated.
Mm.
Now, there are lots of ascetics who go looking for suffering. And I can only tip my hat in this lifetime. I'm not up for it. I thought I might be, but it's not my path.
Yeah, well, it's one way that we know we're alive. And this is definitely true in religious traditions that have all of these uh, absolutely ghastly rites. I mean, I've seen like in Mexico, there's these women that like are crawling like on their knees down stone, cobblestone streets, like approaching the Christ on the cross, and they're bloodied, and this is, or yeah, the self-immolation, or all of these traditions that that invoke suffering.
You know,
And
though, this is my theory on that, which is you can do that from the shadow self, or you can actually be doing that from love.
mm,
So, you know, all sorts of rituals. Let's stick with that one. You can have one woman doing that because she is. really drunk on love, on the divine, and she wants to expand. I can take this. I can do this. I want to transmute the pain. A woman right next to her could be crawling and saying, I deserve this punishment. I am a small self. I hope God, will I get what I want now? Will this earn me my way into heaven? Same actions, different motivation.
Mm.
I'm no longer impressed by a lot of it. Okay, yeah.
Well, you're more impressed by the intention or the motivation than the act itself. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, Dostoevsky asked, "Are we worthy of our suffering?" And you know, um, what is on the other side of it, and how are we able to channel our higher self? You know, um, there's this wonderful section in Man's Search for Meaning where Frankl is taking Freud to task. And I think Freud says something like, you know how to make all humanity the same? You know, you take away their food, you make them starve, and they all are reduced to the lowest common denominator. You know, this is how you level out all of humanity. And Frankel kind of responds, he's like, well, that's a very nice idea on some velvet Victorian couch. But I've been in the camps, and I will say that nothing makes people more different than taking away all their food. Because there were those that hung on to the last possible um, natural right they had, which is, how will I respond? Am I worthy of my suffering? Who gave away their last shoelaces or crusts of bread? This is at least the way Frankl framed it. And that differentiation has always really stuck with me. It's like, who are we when the chips are down? Um, Anyways, one of just the most wonderful experiences of how to be loving is the prayers that you weave into each section. Meditations, contemplations, words, just beautiful words at times. And I was hoping that we could treat anyone who's listening to that experience as just a sample or a window into the experience of the book.
I would love to read something about beauty. This is called The Beautiful Now, and it begins with a piece from St. Francis of Assisi. It was easy to love God in all that was beautiful. The lessons of deeper knowledge, though, instructed me to embrace God in all things. The most common counsel I've been given by great teachers essentially boils down to this: leave the past where it is, in the past. A strong mind focuses forward. I'd like to raise this even higher. A strong mind focuses forward by seeing the beauty in the situation. Always be seeing the beauty. Allow me to point to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 13. Everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. When you find the beauty in the ugly, you change the ugly into the beautiful. And this is the deep light work, and it will require diligence. The people or the situations that repulse you, create a loving thought. It might be like this: we're all from the same source. The agony in your body or in your mind, can you just feel one beautiful aspect about what you're going through? Maybe it's that you're slowing down, or that you're more in touch with your body, or that you're learning how loved you are. Maybe it's just that you're noticing the trees in a way that you never have. Switch the thought that spots the reason to be upset or repulsed and focus on the sweet in the bittersweet. There is always light in the darkness. You just have to mine for it, exalt, glorify, elevate, rejoice. Exalt the beauty in all. This isn't always straightforward, but it is reliably alchemizing. When you identify the beauty in the ugly, what appeared as undesirable is now transformed into something that belongs. You have realized love. And from here, we create a more beautiful future.
Danielle LaPorte, How to Be Loving as Your Heart is Breaking and Our World is Waking Up. This is a book that everyone needs to experience. It's also a journal and a deck, and of course, executed with your signature flair and design skill. Thank you so much. I'm just so grateful to count you as a friend.
Oh, it's mutual. Your respect is just a jewel in my heart. Yeah, thank you.
To be continued.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this interview from the Commune podcast, then click subscribe and check out this video right here.